The archives of the Blackwood estate, bound in faded leather and smelling of dust and forgotten time, speak of a night when the frost on the window panes was less biting than the words spoken in the ballroom. They speak of my story. Before I was the Duchess of Alistair, I was merely Ilara Vance, the last of a faded line, a quiet shadow tethered by duty to the crumbling manor that bore my family's name and the man who intended to possess it. My inheritance was not one of coin, but of stone and soil, of ancient oaks that groaned in the wind, like weary old men, and gardens that had surrendered to the beautiful chaos of nature. Blackwood Manor was my heart and my cage, its mortgages and debts a silken cord tightening around my throat. To save it, I had agreed to marry Viscount Beaumont, a man whose smile was as polished and empty as the veneer on his cheap furniture. He did not want me. He wanted the land, the name, and the legitimacy. My heritage would grant his own rather recent title. I was considered plain, a creature of browns and greys in a world that prized the vibrant plumage of peacocks. My worth, as dictated by society and by the Viscount's calculating mother, was measured entirely by the acreage I would bring to their union. I was a transaction, a deed, made of flesh and blood, and I had long since resigned myself to this cold reality. My resilience was a quiet, internal thing, a fortress, built behind my ribs where no one could see the banners of my true self flying. The night of the annual Blackwood Ball was meant to be the final exhibition of my compliance, the last public viewing of the prize, before it was locked away in the Beaumont vault. I had overseen the preparations myself, polishing the tarnished silver until it gleamed with a ghostly light, arranging winter roses in stone urns, their thorns a secret, silent protest. Ah! The air was thick with the scent of beeswax and damp wool, the chill of the old house fighting a losing battle against the fireplaces that roared in every hearth. I wore a gown of deep forest green velvet, a colour that made me feel rooted to the very earth of my home, a last stand of defiance no one but I could understand. Viscount Beaumont, whose name was Cyril, stood beside me in the receiving line. He was handsome in a shallow, predictable way, his blonde hair perfectly coiffed, his compliments as practised and hollow as a stage actor's lines, hen. His mother, Lady Beaumont, was a hawk in lavender silk, her eyes missing nothing, her approval a currency she dispensed with miserly reluctance. She surveyed the threadbare tapestries and the faint water stains on the ceiling, with a disdain that was almost physically painful to endure. They saw my home not as a place of history and heart, but as a project, a property to be gutted and remade in their own gaudy image. I endured their thinly veiled insults and condescending suggestions, with the placid mask I had perfected over years of necessity. My mind, however, was a turbulent sea. I watched the dancers twirl under the great crystal chandelier, its light catching the frost on the tall windows, and felt a profound sense of dislocation, as if I were a ghost haunting my own life. My only solace was Agnes, my maid and confidante since childhood, who would catch my eye from across the room and offer a small, almost imperceptible nod of solidarity. The Duke of Alistair was in attendance. This was a shock to everyone. He was a phantom of the London season, a man spoken of in whispers, his title as formidable as his reputation. The Iron Duke, they called him, or sometimes the Winter Duke, for he was said to be as cold and unyielding as the season itself. He had not been seen at a social gathering of this size in nearly a decade, not since the tragedy that had claimed his wife and infant son. He was immensely powerful, impossibly wealthy, and utterly alone, a dark star around which the lesser celestial bodies of the aristocracy orbited with a mixture of fear and awe. He stood apart from the throng near the great stone hearth, a figure of stark black wool against the firelight. He did not speak, he did not smile, he simply watched, his presence a palpable weight in the room. His face was all sharp angles and shadows, his eyes a startling pale grey, like a winter sky just before a storm. When his gaze swept the room, people fell silent, their laughter faltering. He was not a participant in this frivolous pageant, he was a judge. I felt his eyes on me several times throughout the evening. It was not a look of admiration, nor was it one of pity. It was one of intense, unnerving scrutiny, as if he were cataloguing my every quiet gesture, every forced smile, and weighing them in some internal, unforgiving balance. I felt stripped bare, my carefully constructed facade of serene acceptance rendered as fragile as spun glass. I lowered my gaze each time, my heart a frantic bird against my ribs. To be noticed by the Viscount was a burden. To be noticed by the Duke of Alcester felt like a danger. The catalyst for my undoing, or rather my liberation, came near midnight. Needing a moment of respite from the stifling pleasantries, I slipped away toward the library, a sanctuary of leather-bound silence that was my favorite room in the house. The door was slightly ajar, and as I reached for the handle, I heard voices from within, the syrupy tones of Lady Beaumont and the self-satisfied baritone of her son. I froze, my hand hovering in the air. "The little mouse plays the part of the lady of the manor well enough, I suppose," Lady Beaumont was saying, her voice dripping with condescension. "But once the deed is signed, we must clear out all this dreadful sentimental clutter. The house has good bones, but it needs a firm hand and a great deal of money." "Patience, mother," Cyril replied, his voice smug. "The contracts are being drawn. Once Blackwood is legally mine, my engagement to Alara will have served its purpose. Lord Ashworth has all but agreed to the match with his daughter. Annabel comes with a fortune that will not only restore this place, but triple our own holdings. A much more suitable alliance." A cold, sharp agony pierced my chest. It was not the shock of the betrayal. I had never been foolish enough to believe Cyril capable of genuine affection, but the sheer callous cruelty of it, the casual dismissal of my life, my home, my person. I was a stepping stone, and they were discussing, with cheerful pragmatism, the moment they would grind me under their heels. "And what of Alara?" his mother asked, a note of bored irritation in her voice. "She will be a viscountess. What more could a plain, penniless spinster hope for? We will pack her off to one of the distant country properties. She can busy herself with her books and her weeds. She is sensible enough not to cause a scene." Sensible. That was the word they always used for me. It was not a compliment, it was a cage. It meant quiet, compliant, and easy to dispose of. In that moment, something within the sensible fortress of my heart broke. Not with a crash, but with a silent, seismic shift. The years of quiet dignity, of patient endurance crumbled to dust, and from the ruins rose a cold, clear fury. I pushed the heavy oak door open. They turned, their expressions shifting from conspiracy to mild surprise, then to irritation at being interrupted. Cyril recovered first, his charming mask slipping back into place. "Alara, my dear." We were just discussing the final details for our future home. My voice, when I spoke, did not tremble. It was as low and steady as a winter river running under a sheet of ice. "Your future home, Viscount? Your future home, Viscount? Or the home you intend to steal, before casting me aside for a wealthier bride?" The silence in the library was absolute, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Lady Beaumont's face hardened into a mask of pure venom, while Cyril's complexion paled, then flushed with angry blood. He had the decency, at least, to look momentarily ashamed, but it passed quickly, replaced by the arrogance of a man who believed he held all the power. "You were eavesdropping," he hissed, taking a step toward me. "An unbecoming trait." "I was listening," I corrected him, my chin held high, "and I heard the truth, for which I thank you. You have saved me from the grim fate of becoming your wife." I began to pull the sapphire engagement ring from my finger, the stone cold against my skin. "The engagement is broken." Cyril lunged forward and grabbed my wrist, his fingers biting into my flesh. His charm had evaporated, revealing the weak, cruel man beneath. "Do not be a fool, Alara. You have nothing, no one. Without me this house will be sold for scrap, and you will be out on the street. You need me." "No," I said, my gaze unwavering. "You need this house, and you will not have it." It was then that the third person in the room made his presence known. From the deep shadows near the far bookshelves, a figure detached itself from the darkness. The Duke of Alistair stepped into the firelight, his face an unreadable mask of cold fury. He had been there the entire time, a silent witness to the entire sordid transaction. Cyril and his mother stared, their mouths agape, as if they had seen a ghost. The Duke's pale eyes were fixed on Cyril's hand, still clamped around my wrist. His voice, when he spoke, was not loud, but it cut through the tension like a shard of ice. "Release her." It was a simple command, delivered in a tone that brooked no argument. Cyril, coward that he was, snatched his hand back as if he had been burned. He stammered, trying to regain his composure. "Your Grace, this is a private family matter." The Duke took another slow step forward, his immense height and forbidding presence seeming to shrink the very room around him. "It became my matter when you laid hands on the lady in my presence." He did not look at me, but I felt the force of his attention all the same. A protective shield I had not asked for, but desperately needed. I stood my ground, my heart hammering against my ribs, but my resolve was a steel rod in my spine. I would not cry, I would not collapse, I would not give them the satisfaction, but the shock and the strain of the confrontation were taking their toll. The room began to feel warm, the edges of my vision blurring slightly. It was then the Duke spoke again, this time his words directed at me, and they were the cruelest cut of all, or so I thought at the time. His voice was glacial, devoid of any warmth or sympathy. "Madam, know your place. This is not the venue for hysterics." The words struck me with the force of a physical blow. To be admonished by him, in front of them, as if I were some overwrought schoolgirl, humiliation, hot and sharp, washed over me. He saw me just as they did, a foolish, emotional woman making a scene. The strength I had clung to wavered, the fortress walls beginning to crack. Without another word, I turned on my heel and walked out of the library, leaving the three of them in a stunned, suffocating silence. I did not run. I walked with all the regal composure I could muster, my back straight, my head high. I passed through the ballroom, a ghost in green velvet, oblivious to the curious stares and whispered questions that followed in my wake. I needed air. I needed to escape the suffocating weight of my own home. I pushed open the heavy terrace doors and stepped out into the biting cold of the winter night. The frigid air was a shock to my system, stealing the breath from my lungs, but clearing the fog from my mind. Snow had begun to fall, thick, silent flakes that melted on my heated skin. I walked down the stone steps and into the skeletal remains of the rose garden, the thorny, barren canes like grasping fingers reaching out from the frozen earth. The pain of the Duke's words was a serpent of jealousy coiling around the raw wound of Cyril's betrayal. He was right, of course. I had no place. I was a relic, the last vestige of a dying name, with no position, no power, no protector. The sensible thing would have been to swallow the truth I had overheard, to marry Cyril, and accept my gilded cage in the country. But I was so tired of being sensible. I heard footsteps on the gravel path behind me. I did not have to turn to know it was Cyril. His anger radiated in the cold air. "Ilara, you will come back inside this instant," he commanded, his voice tight with fury. "You are making a spectacle of yourself and of me." I kept my back to him. "There is no me for you to make a spectacle of. Cyril, we are finished. Leave my property." He laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Your property? Not for long. You will sign those papers, or I will see you ruined in ways you cannot even imagine." He reached for me again, and this time I flinched, bracing myself, but his hand never made contact. A dark shape moved with startling speed, intercepting him. The Duke of Alistair stood between us, a formidable barrier. He had followed me out into the snow. "I believe the lady asked you to leave," the Duke said, his voice dangerously soft. "Stay out of this, Alistair," Cyril snarled, emboldened by desperation. "This is between my fiancée and me." "She is not your fiancée," the Duke stated, his tone flat and final. He took a step towards Cyril, who involuntarily took a step back. "And this is Blackwood land. She is its mistress. You are a guest who has overstayed his welcome. Now get out." Cyril stared at him, then at me, his face a mask of baffled rage. Defeated by a power he could not hope to challenge, he spun around and stalked back toward the house, his mother scurrying in his wake like a malevolent shadow. Silence descended upon the garden, broken only by the soft hiss of falling snow. I stood trembling, not from the cold, but from the violent collision of emotions within me. I was free, but I was also terrifyingly alone. I wrapped my arms around myself, finally feeling the chills seep into my bones. The Duke remained a few feet away, a silent, imposing statue in the swirling snow. I expected him to leave, to return to the warmth of the ballroom, his duty as a gentleman fulfilled. Instead, he shrugged off his heavy wool greatcoat, the one that smelled faintly of cedar and winter air, and draped it over my shoulders. The warmth and weight of it were a startling comfort. "You will take a chill," he said, his voice no longer glacial, but still distant. "Why did you say that?" I asked, my own voice, small, almost lost in the vast, quiet night. "In the library, know your place." He was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the dark outline of the manor against the snow-filled sky. He clears throat. "Beaumont and his mother are poison. They would have twisted your righteous anger into a display of female hysterics. They would have painted you as the unstable party, the jilted woman losing her mind. I sought to rob them of that weapon." He finally turned to look at me, and in the faint light from the house, I saw something in his pale eyes that was not coldness, but a deep, weary sorrow. "My methods are direct. I apologize if they caused you further pain. It was not my intent." His words were a quiet revelation. His cruelty had been a shield, a strange, harsh, and yet undeniably effective act of protection. He had not been admonishing me. He had been arming me, preserving my dignity in the only way he knew how. I pulled the heavy coat tighter around me, inhaling its scent. "Thank you, Your Grace." "There is a folly at the edge of the woods," he said, his tone shifting to something more practical. "It will be sheltered from the wind." "There is a fireplace," I nodded, too emotionally exhausted to question him. I allowed him to guide me away from the house, away from the prying eyes and poisonous whispers, deeper into the quiet solitude of the snow-covered gardens. He led me along a winding path I had known since childhood, to a small, circular stone building, overgrown with ivy, its windows dark. It was a place I had always loved, a forgotten corner of my own world. Inside it was frigid and dark, smelling of stone and damp earth, with an efficiency that spoke of a military past. The Duke found a stash of dry wood and kindling laid in the hearth. Within moments he had a small fire crackling to life. The flames pushed back the oppressive darkness, casting flickering, warm shadows on the curved stone walls. We sat in silence for a long time on a cold stone bench, watching the fire. He did not press me with questions or offer empty platitudes. He simply shared the silence, a solid, calming presence in the dark. It was a more profound comfort than any words could have been. He was giving me space to gather the shattered pieces of myself. "I knew your father," he said eventually, his voice a low rumble in the quiet room. "Colonel Vance. We served together in the peninsula. He was a good man, an honorable man. He loved this land more than anything." I looked at him in surprise. My father had rarely spoken of the war, and never of the men he served with. He never mentioned serving with the Duke. A faint ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I was not a duke then, just a young captain with more arrogance than sense. Your father taught me a great deal about strategy and more about integrity." His expression grew somber again. "When I heard of his death, and of your arrangement with Beaumont, I was concerned. I have been keeping an eye on the Viscount's financial affairs. He is a gambler and a fool, buried in debt. So his presence here tonight had not been a coincidence. He had come for a reason. He had come for me." The realization was a slow, spreading warmth, chasing away the last of the chill in my bones. He intended to sell the old-growth forest to a timber merchant as soon as the deed was his, the Duke continued, his voice hardening. The one your father placed under protection. Tears I had refused to shed in front of my enemies now pricked at my eyes. My father's forest. The sanctuary of my childhood. Cyril would have destroyed it without a second thought. How do you know all of this? It is my business to know things, he said simply. Beaumont is a predator. I do not abide predators. In the flickering firelight I studied his face. The harsh lines seemed softer, the coldness in his eyes replaced by a profound and lonely sadness. The Iron Duke, the Winter Duke, they were names for the armor he wore. I was beginning to see the man beneath. A man who understood loss, who valued honor, and who moved through the world with a quiet, ruthless purpose. My wife, Eleonora, he said suddenly, his gaze fixed on the flames as if he were seeing ghosts in them. She loved gardens. End. She believed that anything, no matter how neglected, could be brought back to life with enough care and patience. He fell silent, the weight of his unspoken grief filling the small stone room. She and our son were taken by a fever 10 years ago. I have been in a winter of my own making ever since. It was a confession of staggering intimacy, offered in the quiet dark. He was explaining himself, showing me the source of his frost. He was trusting me with the core of his pain. In that moment, the vast social chasm between us, a penniless gentlewoman, and a powerful duke, vanished. We were simply two people, marked by loss, finding a moment of unexpected sanctuary together. I found my voice, a soft whisper. I am sorry for your loss. Your Grace, Alaric, he corrected me gently. My name is Alaric. The weeks that followed were a strange interlude, a quiet suspension of reality. I remained at Blackwood, a pariah in my own neighborhood. The story of my broken engagement, twisted by the Beaumonts, had spread like wildfire. I was painted as the unstable, ungrateful woman who had thrown away a brilliant match. Invitations ceased. Callers stopped coming. I was socially executed, left to rattle around my crumbling manor in splendid isolation. But I was not alone. Alaric became a quiet, constant presence. He did not call on me formally. Instead, he would simply appear, riding up the long drive on his black stallion, his presence a silent declaration of his allegiance. He would walk with me through the neglected gardens, discussing crop rotation and drainage with the practical knowledge of a man who understood the land. He sent his own master gardener over from his nearby estate, a gruff Scotsman who, under Alaric's orders, began the painstaking work of assessing the restoration of my beloved grounds. He brought me books from his own library, rare volumes on botany and architecture. He never spoke of the future, or of the Beaumonts, or of the society that had shunned me. He spoke of plans for a new glass house, of the best way to repair the leaking roof over the west wing, of the history of the ancient yew trees that bordered the property. These were acts of quiet care, practical and profound. He was not trying to rescue me. He was helping me rebuild my own kingdom. He was showing me, through his actions, that he saw my value not in my name or my marriage prospects, but in my intelligence, my resilience, and my love for my home. My own transformation was a quiet blossoming. With his silent, unwavering support, the shame and humiliation began to recede, replaced by a burgeoning sense of purpose. I was the mistress of Blackwood, and I would not let it die. I worked alongside the gardeners, my hands in the soil, feeling the earth of my ancestors beneath my fingernails. I pored over the estate ledgers, finding my father's notes, learning the rhythms of my own lands. The grey, sensible mouse was gone. In her place was a woman of substance, a woman of the soil, a woman who was slowly, surely finding her place, not in society, but in herself. The point of no return came on a crisp autumn afternoon. A carriage bearing the Beaumont crest rattled up the drive. My heart seized for a moment, but then hardened into resolve. I met Cyril and his mother on the front steps, my gardening gloves still on my hands. "What do you want?" I asked, my tone leaving no room for pleasantries. Cyril, looking pale and desperate, thrust a document at me. "My patience has run out, Alara. This is a deed of transfer you signed as part of our marriage agreement. It is legally binding. Blackwood is mine. You will vacate the premises by the end of the week." I took the document. my eyes scanning the page. The signature was a clever, but obvious, forgery. They were trying to bully me, to frighten me into submission. It was the final, desperate gambit of a ruined man. "This is a forgery," I said calmly, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Prove it," Lady Beaumont sneered, her face a pinched mask of triumph. "It will be your word against a viscount's." "Who do you think they will believe?" "They will believe me." The voice came from behind me. Alaric had ridden up, unheard, and dismounted. He stood on the top step beside me, his height and authority making the Beaumonts look small and pathetic. He took the forged deed from my hand, glanced at it with utter contempt, and then slowly, deliberately, tore it in half. Cyril gasped, his face draining of all colour. "You have no right." "On the contrary," Alaric said, his voice a silken blade. "I have every right. You see, Viscount, over the past few weeks, I have taken the liberty of purchasing all of your outstanding debts, the gambling markers, the loans from the moneylenders, the mortgages on your own paltry estates, every last shilling. You are, for all intents and purposes, my employee, and your employment is terminated." He had done it. While I had been tending to my gardens, he had been systematically, ruthlessly dismantling my enemies. He had not just shielded me, he had waged a silent, devastating war on my behalf. Lady Beaumont looked as though she might faint. Cyril stared at him, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. The full weight of their ruin was crashing down upon them. They were utterly, completely destroyed. "As for Blackwood," Alaric continued, his voice dropping to a dangerously low pitch, "you will never set foot on this land again. If I so much as hear of you speaking Miss Vance's name, I will see you in debtor's prison before sunset." He let the torn pieces of the forgery flutter to the ground. "Now, I believe I told you once before to get out." And they scrambled back to their carriage, a tableau of pure pathetic defeat, and fled. I watched them go, feeling not triumph, but a quiet, profound sense of peace. The storm had passed. I turned to Alaric, my heart overflowing with a gratitude that was too immense for words. "You did all that for me." He finally looked at me, his pale eyes searching my face. The armor was gone. All I could see was the man, vulnerable and resolute. "I did it for us." He took my hands, his own calloused and warm, engulfing mine. "Alara Vance, you are the most intelligent, resilient, and honorable woman I have ever known. You are the mistress of this land in a way no deed could ever capture. It lives in your very soul." He took a deep sigh. "I have lived in winter for a decade. You have brought the first signs of spring. I am asking you to be my wife. Not to save you, but to be my partner, to build a life with me, to be my duchess." It was not a proposal born of duty or convenience. It was a declaration of love from a man who had forgotten how to speak its language, and so had shown it to me in deeds instead. Tears of joy, pure and cleansing, streamed down my face. "Yes," I whispered. "Yes, Alaric!" The public reckoning took place a month later at the Duchess of Devonshire's Winter Ball, the glittering apex of the London season. When I entered the ballroom on Alaric's arm, a gasp rippled through the assembled crowd. I was no longer the plain, sensible mouse from Blackwood. I wore a gown of shimmering silver silk, the Alistair diamonds blazing at my throat, a gift from my betrothed. But my true adornment was the quiet confidence that now radiated from me. I met the curious and astonished stares, not with shyness, but with the serene composure of a woman who knew her own worth. We saw the Beaumonts huddled in a corner, their social isolation palpable. They looked haggard and worn, their fine clothes unable to disguise their desperation. Seeing us, they saw their last chance. Lady Beaumont began whispering venomously to those around her, her words carrying across the room slander about a spurned, hysterical woman who had entrapped the grieving Duke. Alaric calmly guided me to the centre of the room. He raised a hand, and an expectant silence fell over the ballroom. "Your Graces, my lords, ladies, and gentlemen," he announced, his voice ringing with authority. I have the distinct honor of announcing my betrothal to Miss Alara Vance of Blackwood Manor. Another wave of shocked murmurs swept the room. He let them subside before continuing, his gaze sweeping over the crowd, until it landed on Cyril. "It has also come to my attention," he said, his tone turning to ice, "that certain malicious rumors have been circulated regarding Miss Vance's character and the dissolution of her prior engagement. Let me be clear." He produced a sheaf of papers from his coat pocket, held together by a ribbon. "I hold here the collected debts and financial instruments of Viscount Beaumont, who, in his desperation, attempted to secure Miss Vance's property through fraud and forgery. His estates are forfeit, his title is disgraced. He is a ruined man who sought to ruin an honorable woman to save himself. Any who choose to associate with him do so at their own peril." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Every word was a hammer blow, dismantling the Beaumonts' world, brick by brick, in front of the very society they held so dear. It was a clinical, brutal, and utterly magnificent execution. He then turned to me, his expression softening, offering me the final word. I looked across the room at Cyril and his mother, who were frozen in a state of public humiliation. I did not feel hatred, only a distant pity. I gave them no grand speech. I simply met Lady Beaumont's gaze and said, quietly but clearly enough for those nearby to hear, "I have found my place, my lady. I do hope you eventually find yours." It was a dismissal, complete and absolute. I turned my back on them and their shattered world, and took Alaric's offered arm. We walked away, leaving them to the vultures of society. We returned to Blackwood the next day. The manor no longer felt like a cage, but a promise. Alaric had already put his considerable resources to work. Stonemasons were repairing the crumbling facade, and glaziers were replacing the old warped window panes. It was coming back to life, just as I was. He led me into the library, the scene of my greatest humiliation, now a place of quiet triumph. The fire was lit, the room warm and welcoming. He stood before me, his face serious in the firelight. "It is done," he said. "They will trouble you no more." "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. I reached up and touched his face, the harsh line of his jaw. "You brought the thunder." "You," he countered, covering my hand with his own, "were the lightning that came before it." He lowered his head and kissed me. It was not a gentle, hesitant kiss. It was a kiss of profound connection, of promises made and kept, of two solitary souls finding their sanctuary in one another. It was the sealing of our bond, the true beginning of our life together. A year later, I stood on the terrace overlooking the gardens of Blackwood Manor, now the country seat of the Duke and Duchess of Alastair. The rose garden was a riot of colour and fragrance, lovingly restored to its former glory. The manor behind me stood proud and strong, its stone warm in the summer sun. News had reached us months ago that the Beaumonts had fled to the continent, living in obscurity and poverty. They were nothing more than a ghost, a half-forgotten story. I was no longer the quiet wallflower, but a duchess who managed two vast estates with a competence and passion that had earned the deep respect of every tenant and servant. I was a partner, an equal, cherished for my mind and my spirit. Alaric came to stand beside me, slipping his arm around my waist. The Iron Duke was a man transformed. The winter in his eyes had thawed, replaced by a warm, steady light that was reserved only for me. He was still a man of few words, but his quiet smiles and constant grounding presence spoke volumes. He had found his spring. He rested his chin on my shoulder, his gaze following mine over the flourishing land. "Eleonora would have loved what you've done with this place," he murmured, his voice soft against my ear. She was right. Anything can be brought back to life. I leaned back against him, my heart full. He had not replaced his past, but he had allowed a new future to grow alongside it. Together, we had taken 2 winters, his of grief, mine of neglect, and cultivated a season of our own. Here, in the heart of my ancestral home, I had finally, truly found my place. It was not a station or a title. Sect It was here, in his arms, on the land that was in my blood, a future stretching before us, as vibrant and full of promise as the garden in full bloom.